I've heard talk of a disc golf course at Memorial. Is it happening?
Yeah, it is.
What's the timetable?
Yep. So it was in the second wave of work
Okay.
that's supposed to be done over there. So that is when we take down the fence around the ballpark and
Okay.
blah, 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 blah. So there was a wave of work that wasn't approved yet, but I think it's in our budget for
Okay.
26.
2026? That's amazing. All right. All right. They're relatively cheap to install.
They are relatively cheap to install. The issue is that that project is connected to other projects that are not as cheap.
Nothing's
Redoing the fence at the ballpark,
Okay. Okay.
because their course is going to go right through that big section of right field where all the bullpens are and all that.
Okay.
So
And so is the old ballpark going away? Is the old ballpark going to go?
no, it's staying, but there's a lot of talk about how to shape the fence, what the fence should look like. That kind of thing. So no talk of removing it. No.
I'm so old. I remember when it had the wooden grandstands.
Yeah.
And you could go there and you could go through the little catwalk. You could go up and you could see up.
Right.
We weren't supposed to, but we sure did.
Yeah. Well, do you remember when the BMX track was there and all that?
A little bit, yeah.
It's a beautiful facility. We have a lot going on in that facility now.
Nice.
Baseball's going on in there a lot.
Okay, good. Good.
It's getting some use now, which is really good.
Good to hear.
All right, it is 6:01. We're going to call to order the Brainerd Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 18th, 2002. And Mr. Granvik, could you do roll call, please?
Yeager.
Yes.
Gorham.
Yes.
Duval.
Yes.
Calroos. Woodward.
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
All righty. Yeah, thank you. And is there a member who would care to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening?
I will.
Thank you.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
All right, we're at agenda item 4, looking for a motion to approve or amend the agenda.
Motion to approve, Erickson.
Second, Yeager.
All right, we have a motion, and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. All right, we're now at the approval of the minutes. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from the April 20th regular meeting.
So moved.
Okay, Woodward, motion.
Second.
Second, Erickson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, same sign by nay. Whatever, there you go. All right, we're at old business, and we have a review of proposed zoning code and map, and this is probably going to feel a lot like a workshop tonight. So we'll just have to manage discussion in such a way that we don't step on each other, but let's have some free-flowing discussion on the options before us tonight. So with that, Mr. Granvik, could you set us up for that discussion, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we'll be discussing 3 main topics tonight. The first topic will be properties with zoning concerns. So just a kind of a brief history about this. Staff mailed 8 letters to property owners that may not have been aware of significant zoning changes in the proposed map. Of those 8 properties, 4 had concerns about potential rezoning. So with that, staff will guide the commission through these properties and ask the commission to make a motion after reviewing each property. So the first property is 15770 Delwood Drive, which is a vacant lot. So the property is currently zoned light industrial. The proposed rezoning in the map is for RL2. So with this, just a little bit of history on this property, which was included in the memo. The property owner worked with staff in 2001 purchased the property and began developing plans for storage units. He has contracted with Woodseth for surveying and site plan work on this property. There were some delays in that, so we hadn't heard from the property owner, but he did reach out to us after we had sent the letter. The staff recommendation for this zoning parcel is for general industrial, which would allow for storage units as a CUP because he did work with staff previously in 2021. And with that, I'll open it up to the Planning Commission.
Is the applicant here tonight? Okay, thank you. We have questions for you, if you would be willing to help us with that. So I guess, first of all, our decision on this previously was based on surrounding use, currently, which was more residential around it. Having said that now, some review of records is indicating that there has been prior contact with staff and indicating that a plan is in stages of motion right now. So is the way I understand that.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so then I guess looking for some recommendations to, or a motion perhaps to support the staff recommendation.
I would make that motion to support the staff recommendation for general industrial.
Okay, motion by Erickson. Is there a second?
I'll second Jaeger.
Okay, second by Jaeger. Discussion.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Gorham,
Are there
please.
other options than general industrial, or is that just to seem, what's the logic behind moving it into general industrial? Just curious.
So currently in our table of uses, that is the only zone that would allow for mini storage units.
Fair enough.
Other discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. All right, so we've got a motion there that is supporting that rezoning. Mr. Kramvik, for purposes of tonight's decisions and motions here, we are, these are not being forwarded to City Council. This is just part of our overall revisions to the draft ordinance. Am I
That is correct.
correct in saying that?
That is correct. And then it'd be the next planning commission that we'd be potentially bringing a final document.
Okay. So this is an interim step towards the final adoption of the zoning map and the uses described within the draft ordinance. And so there'll be a public hearing process coming forward at this time. But at this moment in time, the recommendation of this commission is to modify the zoning to accommodate the general industrial, which I think keeps you on track with their plans as you submitted them. Okay? All right, so Mr. Kramvik, what do we have up next?
Okay, the next property is a vacant lot, PIN number 41330764. This property is the intersection of Beaver Dam Road as well as Delmar Drive. Currently, this property is zoned B4. The proposed zoning for this property is garden living. After reaching out by letter to the property owner, we did receive contact. The property owner is requesting that the property remain commercial. They did go through a rezoning process during the previous zoning map update in 2011. The property owner believes this holds commercial value at the intersection of these two roads. So with this, it wasn't an actual rezoning that occurred, but just a request of the Planning Commission during that process in 2011. Staff recommendation is giving two options. Option one, rezoning the property to general commercial, GC, which would be similar to the current B4, or to leave the property zoned garden living because the property is surrounded by the garden living residential district. And I'll open up to the commission.
Thanks. And is the applicant here this evening? right, so if we have questions,
My mom owns the property, I'm just,
all right, so you would be representing if we have questions, is that what I'm understanding?
yeah, I can answer some questions.
Sounds
or
great.
Whatever, if that's the case, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, with that, I guess I would be looking for, we've got two options here. We can either have discussion on the options, or if there's a preferred option that we want to move forward with, then take a motion right away on that. Preferences of any of the members to either initiate discussion or send me a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Erickson, please.
I guess this is one where I wouldn't necessarily consider keeping the general commercial. I think this is on a residential road leading into that subdivision where it's all surrounded by, single-family homes. So I tend to lean towards maintaining the garden living or more of a residential zone is my thinking on this.
So you're favoring that option too?
Correct.
Other thoughts, Mr.
I
Yeager?
have a question for staff. Mr. Kramvik, could you just walk me through the two scenarios one more time real quickly, just to make sure I understand the dynamics of both of those, the two options that we have?
Yep, so option one would be rezoning or potentially rezoning the property to general commercial, which is very similar to the B4. It would open it up to commercial uses, business uses, potential convenience store there. Option two would be leaving the property proposed as garden living because it is next to the residential properties in that area.
Gotcha. I no other questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Other questions or discussion? Then I'd entertain a motion from the commission on,
I'd move to go with the staff recommendation number 2 to maintain the garden living.
so Erickson motion. Is there a second on that?
I'll second that, Yeager.
Okay, Yeager, any other discussion?
Has there been any interest in developing that as a commercial use, or is it in hot demand with the rest of the lots to be residential?
That's a fair question. And Mr. Kramvik, do you have a sense on that as to whether there have been steps to develop that in the commercial sense, or does that?
So the city has not been approached by anything. Could be a potential question for the applicant. As of right now, we know that there's quite a bit of residential construction that's happening on Delmar Drive.
Might direct that question perhaps to the applicant then, if you might be able to come to the podium and address that question for us. And if you would, if you'd state your name and address for the record, please.
Well, my address, I'm from Hibbing, Minnesota.
Sure.
But I have property on the Beaver Dam Road yet. My name is John Carter.
Hey, John?
Okay, so this whole process, when this all started, was that my father believed in that if the city of Brainerd can have commercial, that he can have commercial. Because of the fact of the matter is across the road from there, you guys have a parking lot there. It is proposed that they're going to put a ball field in there. It has been proposed that they would have concessions in there, which would be considered commercial property. Along with the proposal there that you guys were going to put in a RV park in that eventually down the road. He feels that it was an asset for the property he had, plus what he got taxed when they did the road out there. They taxed him on the Beaver Dam Road, and then they came up with the option that they wanted to go down the Delmar. Well, they went down the Delmar, a third of the way, and they stopped with the city sewer there. So he's been assessed, I believe, roughly about $90-some thousand or more on that property, and that is part of his reasoning, is for him to be able to sell that commercially, so that way he can somewhat get back what he had for the commercial, for the amount of assessments that are against the property. And he fills there, it's the best corner on there. I don't have all the numbers and everything here, but, I mean, I'm standing, you know, I don't understand where, I mean, why they want to leave it like it is. The commercial, the residential part is the city of Brainerd I guess, they offered special, from my understanding, they offered the contractor that's building all these houses that are there, and on the other side, plus they had some in Northtown, I'm under the understanding, and they had some over out on 28th Street, that they were given special, per se, treatment on their assessments of the property when they were building all these new homes out there now. So it's like, I guess, you know, I mean, they're just trying to, like I said, they're trying to get to recoup, at least be able to try to have something there. I mean, residentially, I will tell you right now that commercial, I have talked with a realtor, from my understanding, they said that corner would be about $60,000. Well, that's a far cry from the assessments that the city of Brainerd put on the assessments, both from the Wise Road and the Beaver Dam Road, or the Delmar Road and stuff like that. My father made that development there. I mean, I sat on being pulled behind a tractor and built that road with one of those old blades or those old rotograders. I mean, when I was a kid. I mean, so I mean, if there's an option, the residential, like I said, I mean, I know that probably some of the neighbors wouldn't like a convenience store there. It's not, to be quite honest with you, I don't believe that's what we're looking at, possibly a business. Maybe some type of like an office building or something out in that area, because you have access to the trail. And there's a lot of good things about that property. And now that you guys have put that turnabout there, now all of a sudden you've got one corner left there, with the exception of the city of Brainerd. So I guess, I don't know if that's answering your questions or not, or what you're looking for, but I can tell you that's the reason why I'm here. Mm-hmm. So.
Thank you. Ms. Woodward, does that begin to address some of the questions that you had?
If I may address the applicant. Have you yourselves looked into development of it, or are you holding the property for future development to sell the property for somebody else to develop?
If somebody came in, I think, and offered my father passed away here this last year. If somebody came in and probably offered whatever, I have a son that has a commercial business that, you know, we had talked about at times that possibly building where he could build a shop up there and have his deal. You know, there's a lot of different things that we've discussed. I mean, we haven't really come down to a set deal. Like I said, we have talked to, my dad had been talking to a realtor about listing it, but my problem that my dad has always had is that from that corner, it's like, if somebody was to come in and buy that commercially, how much of that land are they gonna want on the Beaver Dam Road up to where my mom's driveway is, and then down the Delmar? Because when you go down the Delmar, like basically where the wood line ends there, and used to be an old field there, that's where, like, then there's like 3 lots there yet that are buildable lots there. So he never, like, specifically got things set up, but I mean, I guess they said, you know, because like you said, if somebody come in and develop it, they want more property, he'd have more property there to give them for development.
And to be clear, excuse me, does it address? And to be clear, this was not developed as a planned unit development. Am I correct? Does that not ring a bell to you, or it was just a plat of lots in the Delmar?
When he originally built that road out there, the first lot, it was a development of 9. There was 9 lots on that road.
Right.
Everything, to be quite honest with you, everything that was on the north side of the Delmar Road there was never, ever supposed to be developed. That was potlatch property. You would never be able to buy it. You weren't supposed to develop it. Well, then the city got in, or the county got into a deal where they ended up selling They ended up selling two 15-acre parcels across the road there. And then one of the people that bought it broke it down and split half of that off, which they shouldn't have been able to do either. And then you butt up to that Crow Wing County area there for they've talked about putting a park in there even. It's my understanding of it. But it would be the second, or it'd be the third house down the Delmar, when you're going down there on the right-hand side, was the original start of that plat. When he built it, there was 9 lots. So you would have had, so 3, 4, Robbie's 4, 5, and Eldon Grader was the first house that was put in there. He ended up buying 2 lots, or he actually had 3 of the 9 that he purchased. So
it sounds to me like this was just a platting of a raw piece of land without necessarily.
he originally had 120 acres there.
Yeah, yeah.
And what ended up happening when that road was built, my dad was on the planning and zoning board for years for the county. And when he built that, his plan was to build it like it was today, like it is sitting there today. That road was the first road that they ever required in Crow Wing County that he had to gravel that road. It damn near broke him because of it. So that at that point, he had to sell the back part of that property off so that he could maintain the 9 that he had up in the front there, so he didn't lose it all. He was a barber in this town, county assessor. I mean, like I say, I mean, he knew the laws, he knew the reasoning of everything. And like I said, his biggest thing is that the city of Brainerd, if somebody comes in here, I got to try to recoup some of my money back because of the assessments that were put on us when they put that water and sewer out there. So.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Are there other questions for Mr. Carter representing the property? No. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for addressing those. So we have a motion on the table, seconded. Is there any more discussion here on this item? Okay. All right, then we're going to go to vote. All those in favor of the motion, which is to leave the property zone garden living, option 2, staff recommendation, just to be clear. All right. So all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Hey, Mr. Kramvik, before we move on, Ms. Carter and Mr. Carter, as with the previous parcel, these will become part of the proposed zoning map that's under discussion here. We will go to public hearing in the near future, and then from there, based on the moving forward, we would recommend that forward to the city council. City council will do 2 readings, so there's additional opportunities for you to be able to express your concerns about that proposed zoning. So, okay. So with that, Mr. Kramvik, can you take us to the next property on the package here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next property is 8299 Wise Road. PIN numbers 412-80539 and 412-80540. So this property is currently zoned B4. The proposed zoning for this property is garden living. I did speak with the business owner of Independent Petroleum Service on Monday. He did indicate that he would like the property to remain conforming. He did understand that it is primarily residential around his property. I also did explain legal nonconforming to the property owner and how that would work with the property. But he did indicate that he would like the property to remain conforming. So with that, 2 recommendations for this one as well. 2 possible recommendations. First would be to rezone the property to general commercial, which would keep the business conforming in use. Option 2 would be leaving the property zoned garden living in the proposed map because the property is surrounded by the garden living residential district. With that, I'll open it up to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Kramvik. Is the applicant here this evening?
If he was, he would have maybe been WebExing in.
Okay, and do we have anybody online? Thank you, Stephanie. So, so as a legal nonconformity, can you restate again what rights to continuing operation here that this applicant or this landowner would
Yep, so the businesses
maintain?
would be able to continue to operate on the property as is. The building would be able to be fixed up. Siding could be done, windows could be done, new roof, the property could be maintained. It's really about expansion of the property. If they wanted to add an accessory structure, wouldn't be able to do that. There's always potential for that, but the applicant didn't seem like they were looking at expansion at this time on the property.
Okay. Other comments or questions, pros or cons of the options that are before us here, or is there a favorite option that someone would like to make a motion on?
Mr. Chair, I have a real quick question.
Yep.
Not to put you on the spot, Mr. Kramvik, but can you, I don't have the chart in front of me, can you refresh my memory on the figures for impervious surfaces for commercial versus our garden living?
So yeah, I'll look up.
I apologize for not asking for that in
Yep,
advance.
I'll look up garden living here. So impervious surface for the garden living district would be 25%. Commercial is typically managed by our stormwater, city stormwater plan. So it'd be reviewed by the city
Okay,
engineer.
that's what my question is, whether the commercial was a stormwater plan or whether there was a measurement for impervious on commercial. Just looking at the parcel, which is
Yep.
mostly low. No question, no other questions for staff, thank you.
Other questions or comments or a favored motion?
Yeah, I got a comment, Mr. Chair. So this one's, it's very similar to the last one. The big difference for me is being that there's an existing current business there. So I guess I'm leaning towards maintaining the B4 for this one.
Or the general commercial?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
option one is what I'm hearing. Other thoughts? I'd be inclined the same way, and going back to Mr. Yeager's observations here, there's not a whole lot of garden living left there with the existing structure there. It's, if you're looking at, future opportunity, that's occupied by a commercial use right now. So it seems to me it makes sense to maybe entertain option one.
Mr. Chair, yeah, if I could just expand upon my thought process there, that was exactly the thought, is it hypothetically, if this were to change, and I don't know if you remember, but way back a long time ago, we talked about a lot of the properties in this area being low-lying land, and could they even be turned into residential, even if we wanted to, right? So I look at a parcel like this as a little bit of a standalone for me, just because of the topography of the site, but I'm trying to run through my mind, even if we did change it, what would be the best possible scenario of the outcome here? And just looking at the parcel, you can see, it's a fairly limited landmass there. And if we were to turn it into something else, I think not a lot of opportunity there to make something different happen there that is more in line with our comprehensive plan or our vision for this whole area. So my leaning here on this one is to stay with the option one as well, and I think that's the direction I'll be going.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Other comments? Mr. Kramvik, on one corner of that structure looks pretty tight to a property line. I'm looking here quickly for setbacks. Does that meet the setbacks of a general commercial?
The current structure?
Yeah, so 0 side yard minimum. That's accessory building, excuse me. Side yard 20, 30, rear yard 20. So that we almost end up still with a legal nonconformity
With setbacks.
with the setbacks. So that one would be problematic, I think, you know, it would be properly zoned, but it would be probably still encumbered by being a legal nonconformity.
That's correct.
Okay. But it does open it up for a number of uses as being zoned general commercial as opposed to a legal nonconforming garden living.
That's
So
correct.
you have the options of all of the general commercial uses, even though it's a non-conforming. So if this individual were to decide tomorrow to change his business plan to something entirely different that's an approved use or a conditional use, allowable use for general commercial, he may or she may make that change, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So there are some advantages there as well. Okay. Well, any other questions or discussion? Otherwise, I'd entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would move to rezone the property to general commercial.
Erickson motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second Woodward, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Aye, all opposed, same sign. That motion carries. So, again, this is a modification to the proposed zoning map that will go to public hearing for next steps. So, Mr. Kramvik, can you bring us to our next bundle of parcels, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last property is 310 West Laurel Street. It's two parcels, 41040742 and 41040743. Currently occupied by Paradigm Auto. We did discuss this property at the last Planning Commission meeting. It was determined that the proposal for these two properties would be the Town Center District. We did reach out to the property owner by letter. He certainly has concerns about the property becoming legal nonconforming. We did a little bit of research on this one. So both of these properties are right now our map currently shows that just Paradigm Auto is B4, but when we did look back at ordinance number 1460, both of these properties were supposed to be B4 according to that ordinance number. So the proposed zoning for these parcels is Town Center. Right now, Town Center does not currently allow for automobile repair shops in the table of uses. So with that, staff is recommend, we have a couple options here as well. My recommendation for this one would be potentially to keep both parcels zoned Town Center. It's around some of the other Town Center areas that we had discussed in the previous Planning Commission meeting, but then allowing automobile repairs as a CUP. And this could be a broader discussion. We will be discussing the Town Center later. But currently, there's Paradigm Auto, Exhaust Pros, and also Tip Top Detail Shop, which is somewhat of an automobile repair. It would maybe fall into that category in the Town Center District. The Town Center District does comprise of both the B4 and the B3 district when we put those together into the Town Center, where currently B4 allows for auto repair shops. So the recommendation would be to add that to the table of uses as a CUP. Option 2 would be to potentially rezone both parcels to general commercial. Because the property owner did work with the previous staff to rezone the properties to B4 in 2016 as part of ordinance number 1460. With that, I'll open it up to Planning Commission.
Thank you, James. Questions for staff on that, these options?
No.
So we've got two additional businesses or parcels that would benefit from a a addition of a use for automobile repair if we were to add that to CUP, and that would allow those to be conforming uses, that would allow our previous decision to extend town center across the river to these two parcels to also keep this business operating. Is that
That's correct. And it would also,
general gist of it?
yep, and it would also allow these businesses in the town center district to conform to the setbacks as well.
Okay, okay. All right, well, I saw some hands in the periphery here, so I bet you there's some folks that would have some thoughts to share with us. So if you would, why don't you come on up, approach the podium, if you give your name and address for the record, and make sure that we understand the ramifications of the discussion we're going to have here.
Quite a few people already know me. Al Schmidt, owner of Paradigm Automotive. One question I've got for you is, why? Why do you want to do this? Nobody's given me an answer as to why my two pieces of property, only my two pieces of property on that side of the river, are trying to be annexed into a town center for zoning. Why?
And those were, I think our work last week included some additional properties on the west side of the river, I think on the south side of Laurel there as well. So it was, based on character of the area and the similar types of development was the general nature of the discussion. So having said that, regardless of the name, I think the important feature is, can you still operate your business? And I think that's what we're trying to be able to get at here. And so changing the name, you're not going to be called a B4 anymore either. So it's just, can we figure out how to operate your business, allow your business to operate in its current location? And we've got to make sure that we can make that zoning designation appropriate for you to operate and at the same time be consistent with the future land use plan or comprehensive plan. So that's the whys behind this. And so I think the important thing is, can you operate, regardless of what name, can we keep you operating there?
Another question I've got is, do you guys want to open up the city to have anybody in town center will be able to apply for a conditional use permit to do auto repair? Because if I'm allowed to do it, other people will be allowed to do it also.
Yeah, and that's a fair question to ask. That's the implications.
That's the implication of this, is that it's going to be allowed that anybody who's in town center can then go and get a conditional use permit to open up more automotive repair shops. Okay? The second issue I've got is I'm getting up there in age, and if I decide I actually want to sell this business, by zoning it to a town center and having me operate underneath of a conditional use permit devalues my business. And if you're going to devalue my business, I expect to be compensated for that. Okay? If we can figure out a way to run this business without having to do a conditional use permit and call it whatever you want to call it, but no conditional use permit, then when I go, if I ever decide to sell the business, I don't have some purchaser coming in there going, what are the conditions? What is this? And possibly have somebody who might be on the hook to buy a business go, oh, conditional use permit? No, we're not interested. Okay, so there's a reason why I went and zoned it B4 to begin with. And now to sit there and try to take it away and have me operating underneath of a conditional use permit again, seems like we're going backwards. As a business owner, we're going backwards. So that just leads me to, once again, ask that question of what benefits does that have to me at all, if any, to be a zone town center? I can't think of one. Can anybody else tell me one? So I am requesting that it stays as it is. Whether you call it general commercial, but my request is, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I don't care what you call it. But I don't want to have to operate underneath of a conditional use permit, period.
Okay.
Any questions for me?
Questions for the property owner, the business owner here?
I have one quick question.
Okay, Mr. Yeager, please.
Give me the background on this of what it was when you bought it, and then the process that you went through to change the zoning. Can you just give me the quick rundown of, since you've owned this, what's all happened?
Okay.
And
Since actually it started before I even owned the building, okay? Went in there leasing it from Close Converse. Now, at that point in time, it was B2 at the time, and I had to get a conditional use permit. When I expanded to take over the whole building, okay, I came up and things were going on, and I talked with Mark Ostergarden about it, going, okay, what permits do I need? What do I need to do? All this stuff. And at that time, he said, well, you need a conditional use permit for the rest of the building. Okay, no problem. And then he came back a week later and said, no, you don't need a conditional use permit for that because you're already in the building. Now, I don't know all the legal ramifications for it. So he signed off on my paperwork, which I still have, saying don't need a conditional use permit. Later, he came back about 6 months later, came back and said, no, you got to get a conditional use permit. And I reminded him that he signed off saying I did not need one. At that point, I just looked at him and said, why don't we just go ahead and get it zone B4? And that way we don't have to worry about these problems in the future. He agreed. We went through the whole process, zoned the property that my building sits on and the river property both as B4 properties, therefore not requiring a conditional use permit to do what we do there. Now, the building before was the Brainerd City Maintenance Building. And I know we're talking about setbacks and all that stuff, okay? But there is no plan at all, especially with the cost of building and such like that, to add on to the building, do any modifications to the building, put another building on the other lot. Right now, there is no plans. Can I say that there will never be plans? There'll never be plans to add on to the building I'm in right now. Will there ever be plans to build something on the other lot? I can't tell you yes or no. I can't see that far into the future. As of right now, no, there's no plans to do that. So we just went through this whole thing about not having to have conditional use permits, and the city itself, and granted it was the last planning and zoning, not knowing exactly what I actually did need. And then coming back telling me, no, you need this, now you don't, now we need to go and get it zone B4. I went through and I jumped through all the hoops. And now it seems like somebody wants to take that rug and just pull it back out from under me and say, no, now you got to go back to where you were before. And to me, it's not fair. You know, you want to talk about fairness in this whole thing. Make it something that I don't have to work with a conditional use permit. We're all fine. But if I have to work on a conditional use permit, I will be seeking reimbursement for the lack of, if you want to call it the lack of the land being usable. I don't even know, I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I don't want to go backwards on it.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Appreciate that. Questions for staff, please. James, in the B4, automotive repair, is that a?
It is a conditional use currently.
Conditional use, so it's current zoning, the use is conditional, and if we were to migrate it into general commercial, the use will still be conditional,
That's correct.
okay? And if we rezone, or we're proposing to put it into town center as of last meeting, and we're going to discuss here the appropriateness of adding automobile repair as a conditional use. So to the property owner's questions and concerns about operating on a conditional use. It seems like there's not an outbox there.
Yeah, and one additional thing, whatever the outcome is, the applicant isn't going to have to apply for a conditional use. It would just be if they were looking to expand.
Right. And a conditional use transfers to future owners of that property.
That's correct.
So it's not a reapplication for someone that might buy the property.
That's correct.
Okay, it's not like an interim use permit. This
Yep.
transfers with ownership.
Mr. Chair, real quick, just point
Mr. Yeager,
of
please.
clarification. If he was to expand today, that's a CUP as well?
It is.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, excuse me, Mr. Gorham, please.
Is there a zoning district in the proposed map where no CUP would be required?
There is not.
So no matter where we go, we're going with a CUP.
Yep.
Thank you.
Jason there. Yeah, please come to the podium again, please, Mr. Smith.
Question is why is the city telling me that I didn't need a CUP before? And now all of a sudden I do.
Yeah,
And I've got paperwork signed off by the city planner stating I do not need a CUP.
I can't speak to that. You know, that might be a question the staff could address after it's, I'm going back and giving them time to review the records, but I can't speak to that right at the moment. I don't know. Okay. Thank you. So, then we have a question for staff on part of the existing parcel that the building is on and the entirety of the adjacent parcel is within shoreland. Are any of the proposed uses or the current uses incompatible with the shoreland district as far as commercial uses, or are those?
So they could potentially occur in the shoreline district, but it would have to meet shoreline district standards. In their conditional uses also have to, you'd be mailing a letter out to the Minnesota DNR as well, for potential uses within the shoreline district.
Okay. Would the DNR have to review that proposed zoning? Well, I'll save that for another day. Anyway, other questions for staff or comments? So, to the point of, if we make the addition of automobile repair as a conditional use to town center, the implications are that auto repair can be anywhere, and are we comfortable with that element in town center everywhere? Because that's the implications. Mr. Yeager, you have a
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I hate to muddy the water here, but I almost feel like that conversation has to happen before I feel like I can give valuable information on this topic. I'd like to get a feeling of the group on adding the auto repair to the town center as a CUP, because that very well may be a great option for us to use, but I don't know if it's a viable option until we cultivate that dialogue between us and see if we can get a general consensus on the group to see if it's even possible. So I like that we're all thinking out of the box, and I hope that everyone can understand that we're trying to think outside the box here to help our applicant navigate this process. So as we are navigating it as well, also. So. Ms. Chair, does that sound reasonable to ask the applicant to sit in for a little while we wade through that a little bit?
I would certainly think that you're welcome to stay, and we can set this one aside for the moment to have the discussion about whether that's a desirable thing for us to do, is to add auto repair as a conditional use to town center. I'm going to go with Mr. Erickson, then Mr. Gorham.
I guess my thinking on this is, I agree. I'm appreciative of staff for coming up with kind of an innovative solution to try to deal with this. That is a big question, to allow that use as a CUP in the town center. So I agree that has to happen first. I wonder, instead of having that discussion even now or tabling this one, I think the simplest solution is, given the questions of the current CUP status, well, I think the simplest solution would be option 2, just to transfer them from where they're at now, B4, into general commercial. It seems to be the most lateral movement. And then we can, once the zoning ordinance is passed, then we can address some of these other ancillary questions. That's where my thinking is going.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Mr. Gorham, please.
I think, I guess I agree with Mr. Yeager that I think we do need to figure out about what the permitted use of auto repair in town center is before we can talk on this. So I'm a little hesitant to slide it into one category and then slide it back. I would rather we understand what we're doing with town center in terms of auto repair as a CUP.
Mr. Yeager.
Thank you. Tad, I appreciate your angle on this, and that's crossed my mind. My hesitancy with this is all of the other potential uses down the road if we go the commercial route. So long term, so that's my hesitancy with this works. Switching these guys to GC, boom. That's a short term decision. It's a no brainer. Seems to make sense now. My concern is, does that make sense if it sells? Somebody else gets it. That list of GC uses is pretty robust, and that's my hesitancy on that. So my leaning is to nibble away at this one with small maneuvers here with the greater vision in mind.
And I think that was consistent, that perspective is consistent with our dialogue last meeting on that. I think I was looking at this as a GC spot. But I think the temperature of the commission was to say, we're not really super excited about expanding a lot of commercial uses here, but trying to basically work within the town center uses. So that's, I think, echoing what we had discussion on last time. Yes, if you'd like to approach the podium, if you'll state your name, please, and address.
Yes, my name is Greg Schmidt. You guys just talked to my father, Al Schmidt, there. And as the person who's going to be taking over that business, I have zero intentions of doing anything else with it, of changing it to a Burger King or anything else over there for commercial. This is kind of what I've dedicated my life to since I was about 12 years old, is automotive. And I have zero intentions of ever getting out of anything there. I've been with the business. I moved back from Las Vegas to help take over and run this business in 2012. So I just celebrated 10 years back here. And not only have I, helped grow our business and everything there, I've put my foot into so many different automotive things in the area, not only of, just some racing things and such like that, but of teaching classes at BIR and, and doing so many things for the area. So if it's ever a question, if that land is ever going to be anything besides automotive, man, we better have one heck of a tornado come through to tear down that brick building, because that ain't gonna happen. So I wanted to at least let you guys give you that as a deal there. Unless he sells it before I'm able to take it over, there's no chance that it's gonna be changing anything there.
Okay, thank you. So I think I hear us being a little bit split about process here. I think there is wisdom in trying to handle this with one decision rather than possibly having to go back and revisit it. So it seems like we want to have a conversation around the automobile repair as a CUP within town center. Do we have a parallel on the agenda here, Mr. Kramvik, that will, in addition to the town center conversation we have on the district boundaries around Main Street, are there other things, pieces of homework, if you would, that we need to be visiting on town center?
I guess other than our conversation town center later, that's really, I think I did include it in that memo as well. So it could potentially be discussed during the town center portion of this, or could be discussed now.
What if we, why don't we engage the town center topic in general? Let's just unpackage this as a whole
Okay.
common district conversation then, if you would. So perhaps you can set us up and Mr. and Mr. Smith, if you'll just bear with us, we'll have it, we'll be with you.
Would you like to go to the town center district rather than discussing Brook Street?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, another topic was discussion of the town center district. So with this, I did complete a thorough review of the code language and the table of uses for the town center district to ensure that the map, code language, and table of uses are in harmony with the purpose statement of the district. Just a few notes to add to this. The town center district is primarily comprised of the current B3 Central Business District and B4 General Business District. Currently in the town center district, there are 16 properties that have first floor residential. Right now, those properties are legal non-conforming. The purpose of the town center district is to encourage the continuation of downtown businesses, but also support multifamily dwelling units. So with that, Jennifer has prepared a presentation for this part of it, so I'll let her take this part over.
Good evening, Mr. Chair.
And welcome, Jennifer, by the way.
Thank you.
Jennifer Haskamp, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So we're going to bounce past this and go into it's going to be focused on town center just in the interest of what we just discussed. So this is a little bit out of order, so I apologize from a disjointed presentation perspective. But part of the conversation surrounding town center obviously was where to break the transition between Main Street and town center and what that means in terms of our residential uses. That was obviously a major part of our conversation. So after reviewing and looking at what would be deemed non-conforming today based on the residential uses, what becomes conforming with our changes proposed for town center, we believe still that we've got the right mix, right, in terms of allowing residential uses in our town center. It's also obviously about the businesses. But this idea of can you have a vibrant, active town center area with a mix of uses, including businesses, and how do you sort of reinforce this pattern of, walkable vibrancy, people out and about, businesses thriving, et cetera. So how do you do all of that together? And some current concerns were brought up about, well, do you want single-story residential, for example, in the town center? Or are we trying to sort of reinforce a little bit more density and try to create, a stronger form with its relationship with the roads, et cetera, and streets? So what James and I spoke about was the idea of making sure that if you've got a structure that is on or abutting the frontage in the town center, that it has to be 2 stories. So you don't have if there's a residential component. So instead of allowing a single-story residential use within that town center district, you'd have to have 2 stories on the facade or that portion that abuts the public frontage. So obviously the idea here is to reinforce the form to create more scale and massing, if you will, at the street frontage, which obviously is a little bit different than what we've talked about. But I know there's some concerns from the council's perspective. There's some concerns that we talked about in terms of allowing a lot of residential in this area and what it could do to the pattern and the fabric, if you will. So this idea of trying to create more form or scale at the frontage would be achieved through requiring a minimum of 2 stories if there's a residential use. And the other thing that does is it really would not allow for a single-story commercial building, for example, to be converted into residential use. So if there's a single-story resident or commercial building in that town center area, you would not be able to convert it to residential uses because you need the 2nd story. If there's a residential use, you need 2 stories. That would trip it out. So it sort of eliminates that sort of conversion problem that has come up as a topic. So this is one way to accomplish that. The second piece that I've heard is some concerns about having a residential use on the main floor as well as a commercial use on the main floor. So I think the first standard that we're talking about actually kind of solves the issue really that we're talking about. But I wanted to bring it up because it's something I heard. I know it's something that the council has discussed. And I've got two examples. So if you'd go to the next slide, there's a couple projects that are actually down in St. Paul by me. So I apologize. This is just where I can get to and not take 2 hours to drive to take pictures. But there's two examples that I thought of immediately where we've got actually commercial and residential happening on the same floor. And they're very interesting, great projects. And so I wouldn't want us to get into a place that we couldn't allow something like this in a new development, whether it's on this scale or on a smaller scale. You'll see here on the left-hand image, there's a Whole Foods, which is a grocery store that anchors the corner. So that's a commercial use on the main floor, obviously. Above it, we've got apartments that are stepped back. As you drive down Selby, which you can see on the upper right-hand image and the lower right-hand image, it actually transitions with an at-grade parking level that exists in between, but there's actually townhomes that are also connected. So we've got the residential use that is sort of halfway down the block, if you will, but this whole project is connected. And so the idea of not allowing residential and commercial on the same floor would not allow this particular project. And I would say it's a very vibrant, good project that anchors the corner. The next slide is very similar. So this is just, this one's been around for about 20 years, so it's actually quite old. But it has done extremely well. It again also has some townhomes that are right on the frontage that you can see on the left-hand image. And on the right-hand image, you can see that we've got commercial uses on the main floor that wrap the corner. So both examples, I think, are very good of how you can effectively mix both commercial and residential uses on a main floor. Again, retailers' commercial uses like to hug the corner. They like the visibility. They've got trip counts on two sides. That is where they want to be. So from a developer perspective, that's where they're going to get their biggest bang for their buck. So generally speaking, they're not going to give up the corner. They want that commercial use on the corner. Once you sort of set back from the corner or wrap the corner, that's where residential uses become very viable and obviously can support the commercial uses that are on the corner. So obviously, this is a bit of a separate discussion from what we were just having in terms of the automobile use or auto repair use. But in some ways, I think they're actually related from the standpoint of we're talking about what do we want town center to be, what do we want it to look like, and the uses are also a part of that conversation, obviously. So one piece I would mention is, you know, James said we've got a couple more auto businesses, auto-oriented, you know, repair types of businesses that exist in what we're designating as town center. So what we need to talk about, I think, as a planning commission is that a use that we'd like to see continue forward? So if new uses did come in, new businesses did come in, is that something that in the area we've prescribed or are geographically defined that fits into the fabric and fits into the overall character that we've been talking about, or doesn't it? And if the answer is it doesn't, then maybe we've applied the town center in the wrong place for this particular business, for example. Or if we say, actually, you know, auto repair shops are very common in traditional neighborhoods. I mean, I live in a traditional neighborhood in St. Paul. We've got small little auto repair shops dotted throughout our whole neighborhood, and we all peacefully coexist. So the question is, does that feel like part of what your vision is for town center? If the answer is yes, then I think what we have is an adjustment to the table of uses, right? If the answer is no, then we need to look at the boundary. So I covered a lot in that one very short period. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Askamp. Other questions?
I'm ready to, not really a question, but
Hit
I'm
it.
ready to comment, sorry.
Hit it.
Ready? Okay.
Jaeger, go.
So two quick comments, both on what we just heard. The first is I think that, in working this over the last year, I think we went a really roundabout way of getting to where we wanted to get, but I think we are ultimately getting to kind of what we talked about. And I'm going to remember a conversation that we had specifically with you, Ms. Woodard, about commercial properties in a downtown residence or in a downtown scenario that are too big for just commercial or retail use, and the desire to have small living quarters in the backside of those. And we all kind of talked about, yes, that seems to make sense. And as I recall, the conversation just kind of kept progressing, and we were wrapping our head around that. What I think that as a commission we kind of failed to do was also talk about all of the other things like single family or dwellings on single floors that could happen with beyond that. So I am personally feeling like we're at about the right spot here with what's being recommended. This is exactly what I saw in my mind when we were talking about this some time ago. Retail on the front side, the possibility for some living on the back side. So I'm good with this, but I think the second story accomplishes this pretty much on its own. It's a really good net. The other thing I will say is that with the auto repair shops, I 100% agree. It fits perfectly, in my opinion, with residential dwelling, especially the more densely populated, the better. And I'm going to cite the example of how many vehicles do I bring to Kelly's Automotive simply because of the fact that I can drop it off there and walk back to my house. Now, he gets them done really, really fast. And I will say that my vehicles never sit there for very long. But the point being is that the residential aspect, drop off your car, get it fixed, get it serviced, walk back to your house, walk back down, get it. It's a perfect fit. That's why I also think it's a great fit for the town center. I can wrap my head around this. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Questions, other comments?
I'll comment.
Mr. Erickson, please.
I'll dissent just slightly, or maybe more than slightly. I don't see the auto body being the best fit for town center. I do see the vision, but the practicality of the ramifications, and that would be controlled through the CUP. I understand that, but I do like the approach for recommendations 1 and 2, and the additional items there, which we didn't get to, but moving it south, 1 block south. But I'm not a fan of the item number 3, adding auto bodies as a conditional use.
Thank you, Mr.
Because of the possibility of what happens. And I understand that we would control that through the CUP, but my other thinking is, that's something we could address down the road too. I think there's a lot of moving parts, and we're trying to get this zoning ordinance passed, and I think it's come back to us now with several recommendations, several property owners, and I think that we need to progress and not further complicate what we've already, get this thing across the goal line.
Thank you. Yeah, we have council members here that may want to offer us some perspectives here.
One thinks you could just go
Right through the street.
Gabe Johnson, 1501 Rosewood Street. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I voted no when it went to council last time, and I will vote no again if it goes to council again, if you are putting the opportunity for main street level residential in existing commercial buildings downtown. Yes, these beautiful developments down in St. Paul are amazing, and I would support it 100% anywhere in our town. But I don't want the existing buildings downtown being converted to street-level residential. I will be a no vote on that all day long, every time, just being perfectly honest with you. I think you should expand the town center, or not the town center, the main street. And I think you should expand it to encompass the entirety of town center. You made a lot of decisions throughout the past year and a half based on the future land use map that you created. Your future land use map that you made, we approved, we all like it, has one district for downtown. It has downtown. It doesn't have a main street downtown and a town center downtown. It has downtown. We like what we have downtown, and we want to replicate that. So I would like to know why we took our future land use map and threw it in the garbage and decided to create 2 zones downtown. And that's really my only question, and I'm just letting you know up front, if there's residential in existing commercial spaces right now, I'll be voting no. But the land, if I can answer on the future land use, I'd like that. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thoughts or reflections? I'm thinking about, going back to the concept of character areas and the type of development style that we have that encompasses uniquely right now, at least, I think, Front Street and Laurel. If we can continue that development, right? If we expect to be able to continue that style of development, the idea of the zoning effort was really looking to try and get at the form and the function pieces, and so the character area was the basis for form, and perhaps staff or Ms. Haskamp might be able to help better verbalize the rationale for making a subset of downtown so that we have a main street and a town center.
Sure, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So I would approach it in 2 ways. So the first is that the future land use plan identifies one general land use designation. That's true. The zoning districts do not need to be a one-to-one relationship with the future land use plan. What they need to be is consistent with the future land use plan policies and objectives, right? So in a couple different areas, we actually have more than one zoning district that's supporting an overall land use designation in the future land use plan. In fact, we just did it a couple times tonight by rezoning a couple properties or recommending rezoning of them. So it's not a one-to-one relationship. So that's the first answer. The second piece is early in the process, I'm sure you all recall, and I'm not sure it was, I believe it was a work session, but I don't remember 100% because, COVID makes you forget things. Not that I had it, just it's like 2 years in a time warp. But there was a conversation that Mike put up in terms of the relationship of the existing buildings with the street frontages. And if you recall, he did a pattern study to really show where our existing buildings are lined up, their relationship with the streets, what those buildings were used for. And if you recall, we had a bunch of red lines, if this is jogging memories for anybody. And during that process, we were able to determine that the relationship of the buildings in our main street to the road or to Laurel Street are very different than once you get out of that central core. So the form of what's happening today in your main street looks very different than what happens on the blocks that surround it. So it was based on a physical analysis of the form of your structures and the relationship of your structures with the pedestrian environment, with the streets, et cetera. Are they 2 stories? It was less about use, and it was more about the form or the massing of those buildings and their relationship with the streets. So through the course of that exercise, that's when we came up with, well, things really do change once you get outside that Main Street boundary. And really the primary distinction between, at least as it stands today, the Main Street and the town center is that the town center allows for residential to happen where you could do a full residential apartment building in the town center, for example, but you could not do it in Main Street. And I understand that's part of the concern. The intent of creating that Main Street was to reinforce because again, if you go back to, if you guys recall, we did that open house on the street where we had folks tell us what's your favorite street or what's your favorite part of Brainerd. And our entire map was filled with pins on Laurel Street because everybody identifies with it of what a cool place that it is and how it defines the community. So the idea was really to reinforce that form and to ensure that that stays protected and intact, and that anything that comes into that area has to look like it, feel like it, behave like it, so that it reinforces that core. So that was the background. Both districts, both the Main Street and the town center, I would say, are very consistent with your comprehensive plan. They are not, and they did not get thrown out in the dirty water or laundry or whatever it is. In fact, we started there with the future land use plan and said, what did you guys say you want this to be? And then how do we get to a place that we're reinforcing that from an economic development and reinvestment perspective? So that's the background. Obviously, we can debate whether we got it right or we didn't. I know one of the conversations is to move the line of Main Street. I didn't get to that in terms of our conversation because to me that's more of a conversation about Main Street and do we have the boundary right for Main Street. But that was the distinction between those two, and that was the why behind them. And it certainly was intended, and I believe it is, so I guess I'm not going to say intended. It is consistent with your future land use plan. Whether or not we got it the mix correct, I guess that's a debate for all of you and the city council.
Thank you, Ms. Haskamp. Mr. Erickson?
Yeah, I'll comment. I don't necessarily have a problem with Main Street and Town Center. The distinction, I agree with you. I think they're consistent with the comprehensive plan. I think the concern is, and where the moving Main Street one block south ties into that is, if I'm correct, the concern about taking existing commercial structures, converting them into residential.
Right.
And those properties that are currently one block south of the proposed Main Street. And I share that concern. So I would be in favor of moving Main Street one block south. And again, as I said, just being consistent with maintaining that commercial use on Main Street, I think is what we should move forward with now. And then if down the road we've got no space and there's a huge residential demand and there's these St. Paul type developments knocking on our door, I think we can address that at that time. And I know it's likely a hard pill for the planning commission to swallow, but that's my thinking on that issue. And again, as I mentioned, this item number 3, as far as auto body shops, again, I think that's maybe a conversation for another day.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Mr. Gorham, please.
And maybe Tad, maybe you can answer this. Specifically, where are we moving the Main Street boundary? Specifically, where are we moving it south? Specifically.
One block south to Maple.
So now it's at Norwood, is that correct, or is it at?
Half block.
So right now it exists between what two streets?
Main Street, front, Laurel.
Let's step. Yep, let's step.
I just want to know exactly
Mr.
what we're
Chair,
talking
members of the commission, if we could flip to the next, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 slides from here, or pages from here. We actually have that boundary identified. So here's where the existing boundary is shown, where it's sort of that dark purple color in the middle and the hot pink around the edges. The proposal would be to go to the mid-block just north of Norwood. So it would essentially move that whole boundary a block, right? So it would go from the mid-block today.
So we're moving it from Laurel and Maple, between those two, to between Maple and Norwood?
Correct.
That's where, okay.
And so one thing, if I might add, is that all right, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
So one thing I would add is that we did go through and look at what's developed on individual parcels to get a sense, and that block, if that's encapsulated, it covers a lot of existing single-story commercial types of buildings. So it just eliminate all potential that any residential could be converted in those buildings. The one thing I would say, James and I spoke about this a bit. If you decide to move the Main Street border to there, and let's say somebody does come in and say, but I want to put a fancy apartment building in, and you guys say, well, this is a great project, but we can't do this on Main Street because it doesn't, it's got a residential component on the main floor. If we shift it that half or that one block, there's always a tool available for folks. They can always request a rezoning, right? So it's not as if we're eliminating all potential for someone to come in and do, take the single-story commercial building that's maybe underutilized and put a great apartment on it. If they come in and they do that, they can ask for a rezoning at that time with the project, and you run those two things parallel. So I just want to point out there are ways, there are tools that it gives more red tape, obviously, to somebody, but there are regulatory ways in which somebody could do that still. And then it does have the effect of preventing the conversion of these single-story commercial uses for any type of residential use.
Good answer, thank you.
And struggling with language choices here, we are talking about expanding the Main Street district further south, not
Correct.
moving the whole block.
No,
a half.
no,
Just to be clear, so when we use the
Correct.
word move, what we're saying is we're expanding the district southward in that concept.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
Just to be
Yep,
clear.
the northerly boundary stays the same. The east and the west boundary stay the same. We're moving the south boundary a block to, capture that block within it.
Alderman Johnson, would you be willing to take a follow-up question? And I want to just be clear that I understand the concern that you raised about converting commercial to residential. Is there a boundary under which you're concerned about that? Is it throughout the entire town center down to Oak Street, or is there a particular area that when you look at it, this really gives you heartburn? If you could help us think about that.
Well, when I first got on, the reason I'm concerned about this, when I was first on the council, downtown was not as full as it is now. The commercial spaces are pretty much all being occupied right now. They weren't in 2015. And we had property owners, some pretty large property owners, who came to the city with the proposal to do main floor housing. And we said no to that. And then he had the proposal to do main floor alley loaded housing, so the storefronts would still face the street, but then the housing would be in the alley. But the conversations we had around that at that time was, as soon as you convert, as soon as somebody invests the money to convert a commercial space into a residential space, it is residential forever, more or less. The downtown buildings, the downtown property owners make their money on the residential spaces, not on the commercial space. So any opportunity we give them to create it, turn it into residential, they will take that opportunity. And they will push businesses out, and businesses will not be able to locate in downtown, and we'll wonder how that happened. But this is how that happens. But to better answer your question, yeah, if you moved it down a block or so, that'd be pretty cool. The more we're protecting, the better, right? And I think, and it is primarily the properties, the Bremer Bank building, we know that's going to be vacant sooner than later, and I don't want that to be an apartment building, and that's 2 floors. So if we could push it down to at least Maple Street, maybe a full block to the alley between Maple and Norwood, that would satisfy me, I suppose, for now. But I'll find something else to dislike about it between now and then. Does that answer your question?
You'll keep us nimble. Very good.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Other comments or questions on this? So,
Real quickly, I'll just, Mr. Chair, I'll just say, I'm fine with moving the boundary. I find myself commonly frustrated with this exact conversation. That is, you have a lot of different ways in which you can make a city look the way you want it to look. You can say you can only replicate what we really like, and then you expand that and you say, okay, we're going to take these blocks on the outside, and you can only build what we want it to look like. That's one way. You expand the look you want, or you prevent the look you don't want from coming in. You have two common ways of which to do that. But what I often find is the big problem for me is it is not the use, and it's not even necessarily the long-term vision. It is what would happen today if we made this change to that building right over there. And that's really the troubling part for me. And I think most people in this room would agree that it's not really the use as much as how it looks within the greater use. So if somebody came in and with this amazing plan of this apartment building that wants to tear down Bremer and build this killer apartment building right there that looks amazing with garden, third floor gardens and all that kind of stuff, we'd be like, please do that. But we're having to put forward a mindset in the short term, which always puts me in a bad spot. I don't like doing that, but I believe that probably the right thing to do for today, because there is an avenue down the road for something to come in differently and that has a different vision, is to go ahead and expand that. And to Mr. Johnson's point, once you let it go, it's way harder to get it back than it is to just kind of sit with what we've got and protect what we've got and hope that the economies and the building comes around and provides us with greater opportunities in the future. So I will also point out that I was one of those people a long time ago who said I wanted like the town center like as big as possible. So I'm gonna jump back on that again and say I'm all in favor of expanding at least to that line. So.
That line being between Maple and Norwood, the alley and Maple and Norwood?
Wherever Alderman Johnson wants it. That's where we want to go. Yes, for sure for sure it's one block. For sure it's one block, from the half block to the next half block. I could probably even be talked into Norwood, but for sure for me, the easy slam dunk here tonight, just to keep moving, is one block, a half block to the next half block, halfway through down to Norwood.
I think body language is setting us up here for a motion of some sorts here to try and wrap and package the town center piece up. At least if we can break it down into a couple of pieces. One is the Main Street topic, and then these additions or these two-story minimums for the residential uses within town center, and having those as conditional uses. And then we have commercial and residential uses not permitted on the same level, and that would be within the town center. Am I hearing that, or is that the Main Street?
Mr. Chairman. Sorry,
There you
Mr.
are.
Chair, members of the commission. That would be for town center because in Main Street, residential is not permitted on the main
Right.
floor.
Okay, so can someone bundle that into some sort of a motion, or do we want to have conversation on the auto shops now? You know, we've had, I think, two different perspectives weighed in on and support for both of those, and we could set that one aside and clear up these other things and come back to the automotive. So I'm open for all kinds of motion.
Mr. Chair, just to sensitivity to our applicant who's sitting here, I personally would like to get into the auto shop aspect, see if we can get at least a consensus, even if it isn't necessarily a motion here, but at least a general consensus of what we might like to say, and then jump back to these guys who've been sitting here for a while. That's my recommendation.
Then take it away with a motion.
I'm not prepared to put a motion together here, but I am prepared to I want to make sure that we're talking through this. Tad, you've made your position pretty clear. I've made my position pretty clear, but I would like to get, hear from the others on how we feel about auto shops, auto body in our, in those town center locations. So I guess I'm just looking to see if I can get a consensus from that, or maybe a feel for where we're at.
Mr. Chair, I am leaning in favor of adding automotive to town center because it does feel like a neighborhood fit. We have small automotive places, we have moderately sized automotive places, and then you get somebody who wants to expand like Shannon's Auto Body, and they need something a lot larger than what we have downtown, and it's not going to be financially responsible for them to take a large building in our town center. So I think market-driven, there's going to be some protection there for having something large scale go in downtown. But I think it's a decent fit. And I'm also in favor of expanding the boundary for Main Street.
Mr. Gorham, do you have a perspective on the automotive element?
I'm okay with it. I think the town center, and I should explain, there was some reasoning with the way we came up with the idea of having Main Street and then having a larger town center area. As you move away from downtown, as we move a few blocks either which direction, it's just not the same central downtown thing. And it's not the same thing with the committed to commercial on the main floor. It is a mix. And I'm fine with the auto body shops as a conditional use within town center. I'm fine with that. I think it's part of the funky mix that we have, and it's okay.
And I would look at the historical body shop buildings that we have around to say that in the past, it has been a use. Some of them have been converted to flower shops or what have you, but I mean, it's been a use in there, so I think I'd be comfortable with that as well. So with that, looking for someone to get us unstuck here so we can move on. So do we have consensus on Main Street District expanded 1 block south to the half block between Maple and Norwood? Check. Do we have consensus about commercial and residential uses are not permitted on the same level in the town center?
Not.
That is the staff recommend, not on the same, permitted on the same level in town center. All right, we've got check. Auto bodies, we got check. Allowed in town center, where are we?
Well, sorry, can I go back to the last one? Commercial and residential uses are not permitted on the same level. Is that the one structure, so you could have commercial above and residential on the bottom? As I'd say no. Are we talking? So additional item consideration number 2.
Yeah.
That isn't the way I read it. Oh.
Yeah. But it's.
Is this precluding the residential on the main floor? Then I'm for it.
That's what I thought
Yes.
that's what I thought this was.
Yes.
But if it's saying they just can't be on the same level, you could have one above and you could flip-flop that.
Okay,
I see.
let's turn to staff for, explain your recommendation. Mr. Erickson, please.
Well, I was just gonna say, I feel like staff was trying to make an innovative solution to solve the issue. But yeah, just clarification on the wording.
So that was more for, and James can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, it was more for discussion rather than a recommendation. The town center today allows residential on the main floor, right? It's not allowed in Main Street. Main Street, there's no main floor residential permitted. In town center, it is based on how we've got it drafted. The idea here was that, so to prevent there being a residential conversion, for example, of part of a main floor building, and then also have like a commercial use attached to it. That was for discussion, not necessarily that you need to, because the other piece of this was that you have to have 2 stories. If you have a residential use in the town center, you have to have 2 stories because it's about the form more than it is the use. So I personally feel like if you change when you look at the pattern of what's happening by moving and expanding the boundary of Main Street, you're going to capture the majority of those single commercial uses that could convert, if you will, and then also adding the 2-story requirement further regulates it, because if there's a single-story commercial use, it's going to be cost prohibitive to add a second story to it for residential use because it wasn't constructed for that purpose. So it's, whether it's necessary or not is up to you in terms of whether you need that additional stipulation. But the way it's written would be actually that what you've suggested, Tad, could actually happen. I don't know that anyone would ever do it because the economics of it are, if you're a business, you want to be on the main floor. You don't want to be above somebody's residential unit. And people, for whatever reason, do not like living underneath anything but other residential uses, like when you look at the market.
Skyline Lounge up at the top there really sounds good to me.
That would be,
With the
I would say,
revolving-
the one exception.
Okay.
Like a restaurant at the very top of a very luxury tower.
The great view
But
of the
a-
Salvation Army drop off.
Yeah, but a two-story brownstone, they don't like it. It's a very,
Fair enough. Thank you, Ms. Haskamp. Mr. Erickson, do you have a follow-up on that?
No.
Okay.
I just want more clarification on staff recommendation 1 then. So if in Main Street, residential uses are not allowed on main level, do we need to even address 1 and 2? Are we just talking about additional item number 1, moving Main Street? I'm trying to distill this down.
Moving Main Street
One full
One block
block to the mid-block
to the
between,
mid-block between Maple and Norwood with all of the conditions and
as they are.
uses as they are.
So I'll make that motion to extend the southern boundary of Main Street District 1 full block to the mid-block of Maple and Norwood.
I'll second Jaeger.
Okay. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, so all opposed, same sign. Okay, there, we got that one. So if we can go back to then the town centerpieces, the two-story minimum, as explained by Ms. Haskamp in the PowerPoint and also in the follow-up comments, making the 2 to 4 attached multifamily units a conditional use. That gets at some packaging here and preparing, if you would, the downtown area so that we're not displacing commercial areas, or the town center area, that we're not displacing commercial uses. We comfortable with those items?
Do you have to, Mr. Chair, make a distinction between the two-story requirement and the multifamily? Or can we hit that with one clause to cover both elements?
The two-story minimum is a requirement, the other one is a use, right? So one is a design element, one's a use.
Okay.
But we could just bundle all 2 or 3 of those remaining as one motion, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm good with that.
Making that motion?
I'll make that motion, absolutely.
So adopting staff recommendations 1, 2, and 3, two-story minimum, multifamily, 2 to 4 attached multifamily units are conditional use, adding body shops as a conditional use.
All 3? I'll do all 3 as a motion. I'll make all 3 as a motion.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I'll second it.
all right. Any discussion?
Only discussion is I'll second it in order to move it forward. I'm hesitant on the auto body inclusion. However, with the conditional use, we have a lot of control over how to handle that, so.
You guys know we're not an auto body shop, right?
So you know.
Yeah, you guys keep throwing around auto body. I don't do auto repair. I'm just
We're
making sure
non-mechanical
for
people.
wording on there.
Yeah. And
Just, yeah, as recommended here by staff, I guess is how I'm interpreting your motion. Is that correct?
well, and the discussion is about sort of auto repair. And Ms. Haskamp, can you clarify, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, on the table of uses, it is denoted as auto repair, and it
Right.
also includes auto body.
Yeah, thank you. So it's the broader definition, so thank you for just posing that question. So we're using the broad table of uses auto repair, and I swear to God, I had it just a minute ago.
Intent, then I would agree with
That's the intent of it. Automobile and truck repair, major and minor, including body shops. Okay? So we're good with that, so just reaffirming our understanding of what we're voting on. Okay. So we have motion, a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. All right, so we've got that. Now we would like, I think, to return ourselves back to paradigm, if we may. And I've got these hopelessly mixed and shuffled pages. So with that, we now have the discussion about the choices going back, that we had a recommendation for either A, general commercial, or option 2, or B, to keep it as we are proposing as town center, now that we've made automotive repair, including auto body, as a conditional use.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Schmidt.
Does anybody have a map up here at all that shows where the town center line is across on the west side of the river?
Where,
How far is town center gonna go across on the west side of the river?
We can pull it up. We have one.
so, do we have it updated from last
But
month's
you don't want-
meeting, though? Yes.
I'm trying to get into my drive back at my office, so if you could just give me a moment.
So Stephanie, if you want to pull up the proposed zoning map. Yep. And then zoom into that area.
So.
It's everything in
Can I email
pink.
it, or, because I don't, we did this back at our office and we haven't delivered it to the city. That doesn't have,
Have last,
Yeah, I've had a letter for weeks.
Put that in there, and you guys don't have it updated?
I have it right here. I'm asking if I can email it so we can put it up.
Unfortunately, it's just Sean's email up there.
Okay.
So we could bring that back, and Stephanie would be able to contact Sean.
Could you describe, perhaps, Ms. Haskamp, could you describe what parcels were added? It seems like our motion and our actions were extending along Laurel.
How about, here's what I'll do.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna look at it. You could scroll down just so that I'm not quite tall enough.
Your white
She's
parcels
missing the
right
one in the
now.
corner.
It grabs this whole area here is where the town center is.
Why are we stopping there?
It's these 5 parcels plus these 4 here.
That's not even us. That's on the other.
No, we're the white parcels up there, but why are you stopping?
Correct, so
3
you're,
parcels.
No, you aren't got the 3 parcels in there, that's the thing. You stopped at my 2 parcels, there's another parcel on the other side of me, nothing being done there. Okay, so why is it that,
so, excuse me, Mr. Schmidt, please, if you just direct your questions to me, that'd be great. Thank you.
yes,
So, please, Ms. Haskamp.
So the boundary based on the recommendation at the last meeting is at 4th here. And it's all of this in here.
So that picks up the professional plaza to your west, based on how that's being described by Ms. Haskamp.
Okay.
So the office complex with the insurance company and the chiropractic and all to your west is in that. And then basically also on the south side of Laurel, returning back to the river is what the action was at our last,
okay,
our
Mr.
April,
Chairman,
our April,
I'll direct this to you. Why are we stopping there?
at that point, the character, as we were having conversations earlier here at the meeting, the character is changing over to more traditional kinds of neighborhoods.
Okay.
Lot and block kinds of neighborhoods, more residential. You have the law office and business complex on the corner of that, but that is I believe that's an allowed use in a TN2 neighborhood, I believe. Am I?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. So at the last meeting, you also directed us that parcel to zone that or propose the zoning as TN2, so that use is part of that district, a
Right.
permitted use.
Right, so the character is changing and more the traditional block kind of development and such.
I'm still baffled, Mr. Chairman, as to how my empty lot fits into town center. With everything that you want to do with town center type deal, with more retail businesses and all that stuff in town center, how do I fit into that? Okay, coming across there, it almost seems like I got grabbed. My property got grabbed because on the other side of me, there was a small, if you want to call it not a strip mall, but a strip office on the other side of me. So along the way, my property got grabbed and said, oh, you're going to do this too.
Yeah. So my response would be, as I had said previously, the key is to try and allow your uses to continue and compatible uses that follow, whether your son continues the business beyond and hands the business on to the next generation, or whether you move to a larger spot to say, you know what, this is a growing business with great success, and maybe it makes more sense for us to be up closer to BIR or over in the, some other part of the city of Brainerd. But preserving your opportunity to be able to operate your business without making you non-conforming, which binds your hands. And so I think what we're doing here tonight is recommending something that doesn't bind your hands to operate your business and additional options for that site so that you're not devaluing the property in any way.
I understand what you're talking about, but I'm already there. Okay, right now, I'm already there. I don't have my hands bound by stuff. I've taken the time to do everything that the city requested me to do. And now the city's coming back saying, nah, we're going to change it on you. Okay? That bothers me. The second thing is, nobody yet has said one thing about, give me one thing this does for me that improves my business, my aspect of it, other than the city gets to do what they want. Nobody's answered one thing. What's one good thing about this that comes to me?
Number one, your zoning will not be the same category. We're changing the name. We're trying not to change what you're able to do there in the extent that we can, as long as it's consistent with the comprehensive plan and the vision that was set forth in the comprehensive plan. So I think we've done that, and I think we're heading in that right direction. You're not being forced, James, if I'm correct here, you're not being forced to reapply for conditional use. So you're not opening yourself up to new conditions, changing the what you are operating under right now as far as conditions. James, can you?
Yeah, the other thing to note is Town Center District would have reduced setbacks as well. So not as stringent setbacks as general commercial or our general business right now. So it'd be easier to potentially add on to the building because of the setback standards in the Town Center District.
So we feel like we're doing you justice there and not trying to be underhanded and
Okay, one other question. Has anybody
steal things from you as far as your use rights?
Has anybody looked at, is this rezoning, going to affect taxes? Somebody needs to answer that question. As a business owner, I want to know what's going to happen to my taxes.
That would be an assessing question, I suppose, more than a zoning question for us.
But it's part of the zoning. If zoning is going to change us and it affects taxes or something, we need to know that. Instead of just springing it on us, going, yeah, we changed your zoning, and oh, by the way, we changed your tax. No, if it lowers my tax, great, I've got no problem. But if we're gonna rezone and then it raises my taxes to rezone it like that, why would I be in favor of that as a business owner?
And I find it hard to believe that if you're enjoying the same uses, that your taxes would change based on the uses as opposed to the quality of the property in relation to other things that it's valued against and such.
Well,
I can't speak to it.
I understand that.
Do you have any suggestions here at all on that? I don't know that we can address tax questions as far as the zoning issue here.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, obviously, we're not assessors, so we can't
Right.
tell you 100%. What we can do is we can ask the county assessor to confirm what I believe to be true, which I will share now, which is assessors have a certain classification of property use or type, which is usually typically commercial, industrial, agricultural, residential, multifamily, et cetera, and they're pretty standardized throughout the state, actually. And so they do not assess you based on town center. They assess you based on the building use, your function, and the improvements. So they classify you according to that general classification that's generally pretty consistent throughout the state. So the answer is that the zoning calling it town center should not change anything about your taxes because you're assessed based on the building and the use that is happening there and their general classification. But we would be happy to contact the assessor to ensure that that is the accurate statement. But in all of the years that I have done this, I'm pretty confident that that is the answer.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Erickson, please.
Comment. Commissioner Yeager speaks really well about making difficult decisions in the short term to advance a long-term vision. And I think we're doing that with this zoning ordinance update. And now what we're dealing with is the handful of parcels where there's sticky situations where, there are difficult decisions to be made, but there's certain parcels that don't quite fit exactly. And we're trying to do justice to that. We're trying to work this out so we have that long-term vision that works also in the short term. I give a lot of flexibility to particularly this situation, as well as one that's also on our list that are abutting the railroad. We talk about the character of the neighborhood, and there's no more intensive use than the railroad. And so I do want to give credence to that. On their north border is the most intense use that we have in town, and there's nothing any of us can do about that. So I do give some credence to that, and another one of our items here on the agenda later has a similar situation. So I've made my position clear on this one already that I would support the general commercial for these, and I think that supports it as well. The northern boundary is the railroad, and I don't think we've talked about that necessarily either. And that definitely impacts the character of the neighborhood. Again, perhaps a hard pill to swallow. I understand the long-term vision, and I support that. So with that said, I would move to adopt staff recommendation option number 2, rezone both parcels to general commercial.
Mr. Chair, don't we already have a motion on the floor right now? We have my motion on the floor right now. That's what we're discussing, is my motion.
Which was, I believe, the 3 for the...
Yeah, so we already have a motion, we have to either vote up or down.
Mr. Chair, point of order, then I think those 3, we had a motion and a second, we voted on that.
And we voted, that was the town center
we're past that one,
package,
okay.
correct. We're now returning back
Back to
now.
this one division, okay.
Now that we have incorporated auto repair into town center as a use, we're going back now to reconcile the Paradigm property.
All right,
Yes,
my bad.
yep, that's fine. No, that's- So we have a motion on the table to adopt option 2, rezone both parcels to general commercial. Is there a second on that motion? Is there a second on that motion?
Is
there a second on that motion? Hearing none, that motion fails. I'll look for another motion.
I'd like to make a motion to continue with the zoning as proposed by our last map, turning these properties as well as the ones discussed into town central, into town center, sorry.
We have a motion, and that would be described in short as option one.
That's correct.
For town center. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a second by Gorham. Discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Erickson, please.
Respectfully vote no.
The discussion here is where my mind is with this, with their current zoning, if they wanted to add on, or they would need a CUP anyways. If we change it to, if we go to town center, they get less restrictive setbacks, and they need a CUP anyways. So that's where my mind is with this, and it fits our greater vision on the town center. That's how I got to where I am.
Thank you. Well, not taking any more comments. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Woodward.
The whole reason I jumped on board with this project is because we had a zoning code that was this thick. And to reduce it down to something that each of us can read and understand without having to have someone interpret it for us brings us to a point where our city is more desirable, our property values go up. Things are better in town because we have a code that can be interpreted by everybody instead of something that laps back on itself and gets confusing. So for me, that's the purpose of why we're doing this and why I am working on this code and why we're trying to find fits for all of this. And I think that by adapting the town center and adding the uses, I think that we're adding everything back in there that was there before. We can't make up for misunderstandings that happened in the past and things that were done incorrectly. But going forward, we can make this right, and we can continue to protect property values and resale values for businesses by adding the right things into the code.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll go to vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. So we're recommending that be town center district. Okay, so thank you. And now I think this brings us to the review of Brook Street industrial properties. James, could you set that up for us? And thank you very much for your patience with us. It's been a long night.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So at the April Planning Commission meeting, the commission discussed options for the current Brook Street industrial properties. So a major concern that was discussed by the commission was the potential for future industrial uses that may not be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. At tonight's Planning Commission meeting, there are two potential options for the Planning Commission to review in order to keep the current businesses conforming while addressing potential future concerns of the residential neighborhood. And with that, I'll have Jennifer take over the two options.
All right. Actually, if you could go to these are not quite the right two options, so let's jump into the PowerPoint. And I apologize in advance for the typo. I caught it. It's Brook Street. I just added another extra S, and it was too late to get you a revised, because I caught it at Starbucks before the meeting. So obviously, we had a conversation about this during our last meeting where we made a recommendation to essentially leave it as CN2, but explore the possibility of maintaining those businesses as conforming through the usage of a CUP. And if you recall, at the time I said we need to talk to the city attorney and find out if that's a viable option. And through the course of that discussion, what we determined is that yes, that is viable. It is something that we can do, but there's also a second option. So we wanted to come back to you this evening, propose both options for discussion, and identify sort of the pros of each of them for your discussion to see where we land in terms of your recommendation moving forward. So The first option is what we touched on during the last meeting, which is to leave the rezone as CN2. So what you recommended, the CN2 to match the existing neighborhood, it would leave it in that designation. The idea would be to have the property owners have the ability to then obtain a conditional use permit for their existing businesses and uses. And that would memorialize the use as permitted and as, you know, with the reasonable conditions. And that would be something that then would remain a conforming use as part of the plan. So even though it's a CN2, it has the CUP. Those are the legal protections it needs to ensure that their business and those operations can continue. The way that this would be drafted would generally say that it would not apply to undeveloped or unused industrial areas. So the property owner would need to demonstrate that they've had an operating industrial business on the parcel, and that they were conforming with the current ordinance, et cetera. It's very easy to prove, obviously, that you've been in operations if you have been in operations. So that's not a very difficult hurdle to clear. But if it's an undeveloped piece of property, the CN2 rights are what you would be entitled to. The other language that would be drafted in there would be that you would have approximately 12 months as a property owner. It could be 12 to 24 since you have a little transition with staff, so you might want to give a little extra time. But you would put it straight in your ordinance that essentially says that the property owners have a certain period of time to apply for the conditional use permit and to get that established. The city could certainly consider waiving those fees to make it easier for the property owner, and we could get those permits in place. So what are the pros of going at this approach? A conditional use permit runs with the land. I think people underestimate, and we sort of touched on that a little bit tonight as well. You cannot take them away from somebody. If they are operating in compliance with the conditional use permit, there's no council that can come in and take it away, right? You can't say, I've decided your CUP is not valid. So there's a lot of entitlement and a lot of power and a lot of value in a conditional use permit. In fact, I work with a client on industrial land right now who always tells me, I want to know what's in the CUP because that CUP is gold. It has a lot of rights attached to it. So, and no council can change it. If you operate in compliance with it, nobody can change it. So that's a huge pro. Yes, there's some regulatory red tape. That would be the con part of it. But the CUP definitely holds a lot of value and a lot of power for that property owner. It would be established to remain conforming. So the way that CUP would be drafted would be that the current extents of the building, the property, et cetera, are conforming. It could attach some setback standards, et cetera, but essentially it would establish that use into perpetuity through the tool, the conditional use permit. Okay, so that's option one. Option two is different, obviously. This one says, let's not keep it CN2 because we understand what we have here, and instead zone it to makers and employment. And then we would put an overlay on it, which I believe in your packets, there were a lot of words and I just didn't remember them all. So I just said the industrial overlay for the Brook Street. It's your historic industrial park, right? It used to be on the edge of town. It's now sort of been encapsulated, but essentially it's your historic industrial area. So we would put an overlay district on those properties. The underlying zoning district would be makers and employment, which is, as you all recall, sort of our transition from your light industrial. It's a version of that. The overlay district then would refine the makers and employment zoning district. So it would tailor the uses that would be permitted, for example, within that overlay to ensure that the types of industrial uses, light industrial uses, could be compatible with the adjacent residential uses. So the idea here is to eliminate some of those heavier, intrusive, noxious types of industrial uses that may be incompatible with adjacent residential. And that would be tied to that overlay district. So the pros of this approach, are that there would be no separate process for the property owner, right? They would just be zoned ME, and they would have their historic industrial overlay district that would allow their business to continue. There'd be a list of uses that they would be permitted to do, and there's no separate process. They don't need to apply for a conditional use permit. There's nothing that needs to happen. The cons, it's a zoning district. So what are we doing right now, right? So this could happen again in 10 years, the next time somebody else gets in here and starts talking about it. If I had to guess, it probably will keep happening again because it's an old industrial park that's surrounded by residential uses. And so it's not to say that things are going to change, but zoning districts can change. So as we all know, based on our conversation tonight, so even the overlay district is still a zoning district. So they can change, a future council could modify them, a future planning commission could recommend that they be modified. So for all of those reasons, it's not that it's, but in terms of the downside as compared to the CUP, that would be the downside. It's a much easier process to go option 2. Option 1 obviously is more cumbersome, probably for the property owner, but does come with a fair amount of rights associated with the CUP as well. So those are kind of the 2 options that staff has come up with in terms of how to address this. And we're looking for your discussion and feedback of how to move this one forward.
Thank you, Ms. Haskamp. And related to the makers in employment, I think there's an additional request item here for makers in employment that we might want to discuss and make decisions on first, if you might fill us in on the setback issues.
Sure. So thank you for reminding me, Mr. Chair. So in our current makers in employment district, the dimensional standards table that exists in the draft code, we have a 0-foot setback right now identified on the table for makers in employment adjacent to residential uses. Number one, I think that was a bit of it was overlooked, but I believe that the issue as to why it was overlooked is because there are no residential properties that are adjacent to any of the ME district. So that's the first thing. The second one is we have very small parcels that we applied the ME to. So the setback in our light industrial old zoning was 100 feet. If you look at the parcels that were zoned ME, you wouldn't have any buildable area just about if you had a 100-foot setback. So there's 2 different ways we can go about it. We could apply the setback standard to the overall ME, and it would essentially not affect any of the existing ME stuff that we zoned, because there are no adjacent residential uses. So we could put in, for example, a 25-foot setback or a 50-foot setback into that base zoning district. The other option is we could actually apply that setback standard to the overlay district if you select option 2 moving forward. So that setback could be in either of those 2 locations. I do not, just for all of your reference, see a negative of putting it in the base zoning district because it really would have no impact on our current ME properties that we identified.
Thank you, Ms. Haskamp. And to clarify, the existing proposed ME districts could accommodate the 100-foot, and the reason being that there is no adjacent residential use.
The way, correct, Mr. Chair, so the way that the current code is drafted, that table, it says, setback if adjacent to residential use. If it were 100, it wouldn't likely matter because there are no residential uses. I will tell you that if you made it 100, but select option number 2 for the Brook Street properties, that would negatively impact them because there are adjacent residential uses. And when we looked at it today using our GIS, which is not a perfect science, but based on that, the closest distance between one of the buildings in the industrial area of Brook Street and an adjacent residential use was 60 feet between the buildings and a house. So 100 feet would be problematic in that case. So we would.
I'm sorry, please complete your thought.
So we would need to make sure that the overlay district then would correct for that and allow for a smaller setback. Conversely, we could just put the smaller setback. I would not recommend 100 feet for our ME because we're trying to promote smaller sort of incubator types of businesses. So I think a more appropriate setback would be something like 25 feet, 25 to 40 feet.
But to be clear, under the current zoning, one of those parcels does not meet the setback under the I-2. Is it the I-2? It's I-2, right?
In the ME?
I-1, excuse me. In the Brooks, I think the Gull Lake sandblasting and powder coating is less than probably 20 feet from a
Currently, both of them
residential,
do
so-
have issues with setbacks in the light industrial zone.
Yeah, so that would already be a legal nonconformity.
Correct.
So if we chose to put up to 100 feet, it wouldn't necessarily limit that one's already a legal nonconformity, correct?
That one, that's correct, but it would potentially cause others to become non-conforming as a result of using that very large setback.
Thank you. So I think we probably need a decision on this before we dive into to what to do with the Brook Street, if we're inclined to go with a Makers and Employment Overlay District. It would strike me it'd be helpful to at least have some thoughts on what we think is an appropriate setback, residential for a light industrial type use on smaller base parcels, and the uses are some of them that we're allowing in the ME by permit alone can be pretty aggressive. But then the overlay is doing some sorting of that, so we may not have to be as fearful of putting something really aggressive next to a residential area. Thoughts on an appropriate way forward?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If it's, if I could ask Ms. Haskamp for a recommendation on what that typically looks like for a setback from ME to residential, what is a typical scenario? Is that 15, 10, 30?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I would probably be somewhere in the 20 to 30 foot setback range. Again, it really won't affect the other portion of the small area of ME that we have. And so, but when I think about uses that we're talking about in terms of these types of, smaller industrial scale, light industrial scale uses, the point is that we are not allowing these very large, noxious, smelly, high intensity types of uses. And so to have a 100-foot setback, I don't think is necessary at all. I would be somewhere in that sort of 20 foot.
Mr. Kramvik, please.
And Jennifer's recommendation would be consistent, kind of with that general commercial as well. That that 30-foot setback, 25-foot setback would be consistent with that as well.
Does this require a motion? I'll make a motion. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Erickson, please.
Question of staff. I appreciate these two options and the length that you've gone through, but is a third option to simply keep it as is? And what would that look for, like translating into the updating? It's because it's currently I-1 and.
Yep, so currently it's I-1, proposed CN2, which would then make those properties legal non-conforming. so they'd be able to fix up their properties, you know, again, with the legal nonconformities, do windows, siding, roofs. If they completely rebuild a structure in its exact footprint, just wouldn't be able to change. They could even sell to a similar use, you know, and they could take over the building. They just wouldn't be able to sell to a different use.
I guess my question is, what's the most similar,
Right.
most lateral change we go with for the new update? Is it?
CN2, right?
So it would either be makers and employment, or it would be the general industrial. So the makers and employment is closer because of the scale and the size. And I would even say, you know, the majority of the uses that are there are very consistent with what we've identified in makers and employment. That's my, you'd really have to do a, you know, this, but they both would have certain things that it would cover. But makers and employment, I think, is very close.
I would also say makers and employment is very close to light industrial.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Yes, Mr. Erickson.
In addition to that, as was pointed out, both would cause the legal nonconforming due to the setback, unless we change the makers employment setback.
Can we get the GIS
Right
up
on
by
a
chance?
trail. I mean, it's the building looks like it's right on the trail easement.
Literally
if I'm-
10 feet from.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, both, there are a couple parcels that are uses or buildings that, regardless of if you went makers and employment or if you went with the general industrial, they would be non-conforming for setbacks. The one thing I will say about being non-conforming for setbacks, and I hesitate to say this because I'm going to throw a monkey wrench into everything, but I have seen some codes with their legal non-conforming language talk about that if an existing building is non-conforming for a setback, a side yard setback or a rear yard setback, so long as the expansion is not further adversely impacting that nonconformity. So meaning you could not put an addition on the side where you do not meet the setback, but you could expand away from and into your yard. So the language gets said that it is non-conforming, but if you're only non-conforming for a setback violation, so to speak, that you could still expand provided it's in the direction that is not further, you know, encroaching into the offense, if
The
you will.
greater nonconformity.
Correct.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of code language that says that. So that's certainly something in the non-conforming section we could add, where it's really only setback. It's not area, it's not impervious surface, it's not, as you all know, it's not the non-conforming use, et cetera. So that would be another way to handle that, so you could keep a reasonable setback established for the base zoning district without, you know, zeroing it all out because of a parcel.
But if that were an accessory structure as opposed to an addition, does that same
Yep.
apply that if I'm putting the accessory structure away from the setback where I do not have,
Correct.
that I don't meet, then that is, again, not making the nonconformity greater.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Other questions of staff?
Not about this. I think I'm good on this one.
You otherwise.
Well, I was clarifying on the greater nonconformity. So, so if they're in makers, and it's a nonconforming building, they want to expand, variance process because it's a nonconforming, correct?
Under the current code, yes.
If we go the makers route,
Correct.
understood.
Without
But
making
there is an
any,
avenue, yeah. That's all.
So I was hearing the basis of a motion coming from you earlier. You still have a motion for us?
I don't even remember what that was, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Erickson had one cooking here, but I could be wrong.
Talking of setbacks,
Oh, yes, the setback. You're right, yes. Yeah, I'm gonna take the opportunity. I'm gonna make a motion to recommend a setback amendment to our current makers of 20 feet.
is there a second on that?
Second.
All right, Woodward second. Any discussion on that setback? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I
Aye, same sign for no. All right, we got one.
did something.
So now we're at the point of having the discussion, and thank you for helping step us through that. So now we've got the two options, or the null option of nothing changes and it's a legal nonconformity. So we're at that point for this property here. Are we stepping through these one by one, James, or how do you want to, how are you proposing that we handle?
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I guess I would recommend that we handle them collectively, because I don't think you want to get into a place where we're spot zoning things in this particular area. So I think we need to address them comprehensively of how we're going to approach them together. And I do think there are ways that we can solve some of the issues with respect to the setbacks, as I said. So, depending on which route you go, I think we have a couple of solutions.
Can we please switch back to the two options? I have one quick question about option number one. I just want to make sure I understand. Under option number one, expansion is not even on the table for if we leave it rezoned as the CN2, that gives them the ability to maintain that use into the future, but expansion is not possible. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, actually, I would say that's not totally correct. They would
Okay.
need an amendment to the permit, to the
Okay.
conditional use permit. So the use is permitted, right?
Yep.
The building as it stands is permitted, the amount of parking is permitted, et cetera. You put all of that into the conditional use permit. I have seen a couple permits written before that say things like, up to 25% expansion, without an amendment. Anything greater than that requires an amendment. You know what I mean? So
That was my question. Where I'm going with this is if that homeowner, and we heard this in testimony, if I want to sell this business and they want to expand it and now they can't do it because it's not conforming, but there is a mechanism through option number one for future expansion.
there is. It would be an amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
We're chairless.
We're chairless.
Well, I'm not exactly prepared to make a motion or entertain a motion until we have the voting members back, but.
Madam Chair, I would just weigh in, not with a motion, but that helps me. There's no good options with this one. As it's proposed now, the null option is a CN2, which poses problems. Both these options provide unique solutions to the property owner. And they're complex, but they're innovative, and we're taking that extra step to, secure the property's values, secure the property owner's ability to expand through that option. So I like the direction. I'm leaning towards option one because it gives the property owner the most
Teeth.
the most ability to preserve individual property owner rights. Just for discussion purposes.
And option number one is also transferable to a new. It's for life. I mean, it is for the life. I mean, so if I was one of these property owners, I would be strongly levering for option one personally, but just because of the power of the CUP. But
Mostly so option two doesn't come back and have this discussion again 10 years down the road
Exactly.
because it's on a map one way and.
we are playing out option number two, and we have for the last couple months. to be honest.
Yes, we are playing out option number two. So, you like to? Go ahead. You come. I'll take the camera.
I'm Bob
Please.
Despot. You're
you.
probably sick of hearing from me. I own the Pike Plumbing Building. Jeff Strobel from Gull Lake Sandblasting couldn't be here tonight, so he asked me to represent his feelings. I guess our joint feelings are, leave it alone. It isn't harming anything. Why change it? You know, his feelings were if you did have to change it, he was looking at option 2. And I guess I don't believe you do this to us again every 10 years, because I've gone through this before. The zone at I-1, 10 years ago. You couldn't possibly be that mean. But I would probably lean towards option 2 myself, being that you don't have to go through the conditional uses. And, you know, through the years, I've had a number of little businesses which really conform to what Makers and Employment District talks about, is the opportunity for small businesses to get a start. I've had on any number, there's little spaces in there that I could rent. I've had any number of little that moved on and bought other buildings in town and expanded their businesses simply because I could rent to them economically. We need that in a town like this. Mm-hmm. So I guess I want to stay conforming, you know, without having to go through a lot of rigmarole. Thank you for your time. And Gull Lake said the same.
Thank you.
Well, with that being said, I'm prepared to make a motion to pursue option number 2. So I spoke just a second ago about option number 1, but given testimony here, I believe that option number 2 gives us far more flexibility in the future to change this if something comes up. So with that, I'm going to make a motion to pursue option number 2.
Second. I can't. I thought I was handing it back to you.
All right, so we have motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all opposed, same sign. All right, so that will be an overlay district on that. I would ask that we think about naming it something other than historic Brainerd, because when I think about historic Brainerd and how we use that historic phrase in the comp plan, it's more about our old structures and the character of the you know, of Brainerd, and not necessarily looking back at a historical, you know, we could look at the historic dump over at Northland Arboretum, right? But, you know, I think if we might think about it maybe in different words, you know, whether you think about a legacy or something like that, you know. And the Makers and Employment Overlay would be MEO, wouldn't it? MEO, MIO, and then, so I don't know, Brainerd Industrial Legacy Overlay, something like that. If you can think about, give us something better that doesn't confuse it with some of the historic structures and stuff in town, that'd be great.
An acronym that inspires love for tacos is good.
Billow, isn't it, though? Huh?
Cinco.
Okay. So with that, James, do we have any, I've got these pages flipped so many times, do we have any open ends on this agenda item that we need to discuss? Or have you gotten sufficient guidance on how to make the amendments to the proposed zoning map?
So we did discuss everything that was in the agenda, so that there is one other item that did come to our attention. This was after the agenda did come out. Me and Jennifer discussed this. You know, it could be a pretty easy change, you know, after our discussions here, and think that it would be good to review this tonight here. The last item is talking about essentially the public, semi-public district. I did have a conversation with a potential residential development at the YMCA campus, which is part of their capital improvement plan. We discussed this, kind of the PSP district as a whole. Right now, the YMCA district, kind of per our last planning commission, is proposed in the map to be PSP. So obviously this district is kind of a new one. We don't have it, anything like it really in our current zoning code. Something great about this district is a lot of these kind of large semi-public areas aren't going to have to apply for CUPs anymore for expansion. But with that, we did see that, currently on some of these large church campuses, potential college and universities, as well as potentially the YMCA, there are, currently some residential uses on there as well as potential residential uses in the future. So what we're proposing tonight here is a pretty, simple change to the table of uses, just allowing residential, single family, 2 to 4 multifamily, and 5+ as CUPs on the table of uses. And with that, I'll open it up to the Planning Commission for any questions.
Questions of staff on the proposed additional use to the public, semi-public district?
Mr. Chair, I would
Yes,
just
Mr. Erickson, please.
add to, I guess, just a procedural thing, I guess. We've already approved the agenda, so having not had time to really think about this, I'd maybe think about maybe leaving this off. I don't mean to throw a wrench in this, folks, but given that we're dealing with zoning ordinance that's been to council and come back for revisions and had public hearing on it, to making a change at this point. It would be an addition to the agenda.
Mr. Erickson, would you consider it just a continuation of the topic of reviewing proposed zoning code and map, and these are the issues in the housekeeping in order to prepare a draft for public hearing?
Yes.
Fair?
Yeah, I just, I don't know, I guess I'd like a little more time to look at it, but unless it's more of an administrative change, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gorham?
I'd also have to say, I'm not prepared to really consider this yet. I think this is just, I don't want to bring the whole thing to a halt, but it seems like we should give it a little deeper thought.
Mr. Chair, if I could, staff, good catch. I mean, staff caught it. It's clearly an issue, so I think it's something that we should consider in due process.
Okay. Yes, please, Ms. Haskamp.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I might suggest, I understand you'd like to sit with it for a little bit and just contemplate how this might all work together. But if you have some initial reactions, that would be helpful to staff. And what we can do is we are hoping, obviously, to be able to bring this forward comprehensively at for a public hearing at the next meeting. And so we could easily have a conversation about the specific topic. We could bring the draft. It would be simply a very small change to the table of uses, so you could always strike it before the public hearing if you so choose. But when we looked at it, the basis for this is really when you think of college campuses, for example, that might have dormitories on them as one plausible scenario. And when you think about, I know there's a fair number of churches that, will have a home on it for the priest or the pastor. So there's these ancillary residential, they're not clearly the principal use. In fact, in this case, they actually are the accessory use to the principal public, semi-public use, which is, the church or the school or whatever. And when we spoke about it, we could come up with actually a couple examples that probably already exist in town. And so it felt like our objective certainly isn't to say that, the pastor's home or whatever that's part of the campus is not permitted. I think we know that there are many of those types of uses. So it was really just to clean that up. So, if there's any initial feedback you could give us, that would be helpful, but we could certainly put it also with our meeting, at the next time for further discussion if you'd like.
So I would say that based on the opinions expressed already, I think that is the preferred avenue for us to go then, is if you could package something else for us to be able to reflect on and prepare and bring it forward for our next meeting, and that would be consistent with the public hearing meeting, or is that, what's our timing on that? I'm trying to think about.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, yes. So our hope was that we would have the public hearing at the regular June meeting.
Yep.
So what we could do, since this is maybe an outstanding issue, we could simply put it on the agenda prior to the public hearing, just so that the conversation is had and everybody can hear it. And so the draft, we would have, a short staff report about it. It could go before that, so that you could have that conversation, and if the public has anything to say about that, which I somewhat doubt, but if they did, they could certainly then at least, have the benefit of hearing your conversation.
So I'm hearing a workshop or a special meeting. Is that what we're talking about prior to, or just, how are we?
Right, just an
At the
agenda.
beginning, so it's going to be noticed.
It will be on the agenda, correct?
It would be noticed, and it would be part of the same meeting as the public hearing.
Correct.
All right. Mr. Erickson, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the clarification. I would categorize it as a non-material change, but to address it in that manner, I think would be very transparent and open. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So does that complete agenda items that, for the map and the zoning ordinance that you were hoping to work through tonight?
That is complete.
Okay, thank you. So with that, moving to new business, there's none. Now we're at public forum. This is a time allocated for citizens to bring matters not on the agenda to the attention of the Planning Commission. Time limits may be imposed. And so we're going to open that public hearing at 8:35. And is there anyone online, Stephanie? Okay. And any? Okay. There's anyone here to speak? Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Only items not on the agenda.
Oh, remember the part about time limits.
Nothing of this is on the agenda. It's Michael Day, 1702 Linden Lane. Good job, guys. Good job tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 8:37, and we'll move on to Community Development Director's report. Mr. Kramvik, please.
Yeah, I just do have one item tonight. Just wanted to give a quick update on the Mississippi Landing Trailhead Park. I did have a brief conversation with interim city engineer Paul Sandy. So the city did receive bids for the project. After review, the project was awarded to custom builders. The accepted bid did allow for alternatives 1 and 2 to also be awarded, which included the amphitheater structure as well as the river steps. As of right now, the canoe landing was pulled out at the last minute due to permitting issues with the DNR. It will be installed once the city comes to a resolution, however. So with that, right now there's not an exact start date for it, but construction is anticipated for early June. With that, that's everything I have.
Thank you. Questions for staff report?
Yeah, just to comment on that, we would need to change the name to Mississippi Steps Trail, perhaps.
Oh.
That was the whole point of the park, part of it. That's disappointing that that's not in there from the DNR.
No, that's perfect. Okay. Then with that, we're on to commissioner questions and comments. We'll start with Mr. Erickson.
Nothing further, thanks.
Okay. Ms. Woodward. Okay. Mr. Gorham.
Nothing.
Mr. Yeager.
Nothing.
Nice play. And I have nothing either. So with that, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, I have Woodward. Is there a second? Gorham?
Sure.
All righty. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Good job with the option. Thanks, everybody, for
Thank you,
taking the
folks.
extra time to go over all those properties.